had to figure it out. So that was like my whole body completely malfunctioning, and every day was a different experience, a different malfunction. And I didn't know what's going to happen next. So it was like being constant, stress of you don't know what the next day brings you, and the next day may be the end of you, and not knowing that, and you have no control over it.
Being in the zone is accessing a state of flow, a state of unconscious perfection, not noticing the actions that we're taking or overthinking them. In this episode, I interview Rave Mehta, a master of flow. He has an incredible story and a varied life experience that shapes, in my opinion, a modern Renaissance man. He's the co-founder of Helios Entertainment, a 3D game development company that pioneered virtual reality for education in the late 90s. He's managing director of Meta Group, an infrastructure company, a published author, and one of Wall Street Journal's Men of the Year. Ravi was diagnosed with Lyme disease. Faced with limited options, he turned to alternative systems to treat himself. Through rigorous and scientific efforts, he essentially cured himself and has been asymptomatic for years. He attributes this to a deeper exploration of his own fear and flow states, and now travels the world teaching others how to access their own flow through an immersive experience called Flow Piano Sound Bath. I reconnected with Ravi at his Flow Piano Sound Bath event in Los Angeles the night before recording this episode. I decided to follow my own flow when I realized I needed to interview him. At this time, Look Up was completely novel. I had no clue what the topic of my show would be nor the format. This is a longer episode than the others, but I've listened to it and I feel like removing any of the content would be a disservice to you all. We go deep on a broad range of subjects, and I'm extremely grateful that he agreed to record with me on a whim. We dive into his battle with Lyme disease, discuss how people learn, explore the differences between art and entrepreneurship, identify the power of limiting screen time, and Ravi teaches me how we all can access our state of flow. I hope you all enjoyed the episode as much as I enjoyed speaking with Ravi. So without further ado, Rave Mehta. Hey, Ravi. How are you?
Good, Mark. How are you?
So I guess for starters, I'd love if maybe you can tell people a little bit about yourself, your background.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an engineer by trade, civil engineer. I went to school, got my undergrad master's in that, and also pursued my MBA as well. And grew up in a family business where we build infrastructure that my father started. So we've been building highways, roads, bridges, airports, and rail systems and water systems for about 40 years now. And I used to oversee and CEO that company. And then I took a sabbatical because I got interested in tech and started a VR company, or I got pulled into a VR company my friend started and became essentially executive co-founder, principal there. And
what was the name of that company?
Called Modus. And we're doing military training and simulation systems. So we got in this,
Oh, cool.
we got really good at learning how people learn, essentially, and and how people perceive. So we take content that was, say, from the Army that took 8 months of training down to 8 weeks, while boosting our learning protocols by 80%. So he's kind of spawned a field I call accelerated learning, and how to transfer knowledge more efficiently, and got really good at that. And so I learned a lot just from all these algorithms and protocols that we developed and techniques we developed around how to most efficiently take knowledge from A and move it into either an individual or a large group of people, and then after that,
what are some learnings from that?
Well, there are 4 basic protocols. There's retention, recall, application, and transfer. So retention is how much information you retain when receiving it, and we found that people obviously receive information. Now, this is in late 90s, right? So this stuff was really novel back then.
Oh, wow.
So this is, when we're pioneering VR, we used VR back then, and introduced the first game engine into the Army back then. So we did a lot of pioneering. And this back when like 56K modems or 128 DSLs were the norm.
Oh, wow.
So we were like doing serious parallel streaming stuff. Like we invented a lot of cool tech to make it really efficient to have multiple locations around the world to participate in a serious, what we call serious games, in a simulation together. And but the retention recall application transfer. Retention is how much information you retain. Recall is how quickly you can recall that information, if you can recall it at all, upon demand. Applications, how do you apply that information, and transfers, how you could transfer that information from point A to point B. So in learning, and it's usually in that order, right? So when you get to high proficiencies of transfer, that means you have to have the ability to retain, recall, and apply it in a really efficient way for you to be able to transfer that knowledge to somebody else. So it's almost like teaching is a final stage of learning, because if you can't teach it to somebody else, then you haven't learned it or simplified it enough to make it digestible for you, and then therefore to move that same knowledge into somebody else. So we would really we created, back then we were doing computer-based training stuff. We were pioneering. So we would take information and we'd learn how the learner was learning, and then we'd repurpose information on the fly and feed it back to them in the way most digestible to them. That's how we were able to boost everyone's learning protocols by 80% with 80% less time. Wow. Just because we were really personalizing learning based on how they learned best. So if one person, was very visual, we'd feed them more pictures. If another was better with language and reading, we'd feed them more text, but it's all like pulled from this really interesting database structure we created that kind of we're trying to model how the human mind works. We had or object-oriented database on the top, and then a relational database on the bottom. It's a parking, kind of like your parking lot, like your conscious and your subconscious mind.
It's like Neuralink well before.
Yeah. This is all the early stages of all this stuff, setting the foundations and, for what's happening now. But it was super cool back then. I mean, we did some cool stuff. And then it moved into, doing a lot of military tech transfer stuff. We worked with different military contractors and national labs and spun out companies. And so I had like this really interesting tech and engineering kind of business career. At one point I got invited to participate in the New York City 2012 Olympics. I moved there up to New York and worked on their Cultural Olympiad campaign. So they had a line item. Before that, I was actually working on this idea I came up with called Gateway to the World, where I had all these geodesic domes and wanted to place them in different parts of the city. And we had all these countries, 100 and some countries, that were interested in featuring their top visual artists or musicians or fashion designers or performers.
Where was the 2012 Olympics?
It ended up being in London, but New York City was the top, the last in the final bids. So when they're bidding for this, so we were putting together this whole concept around a Cultural Olympiad campaign called Gateway to the World, which was an idea I came up with. And after a while, they heard about it. I was like, trying to get all these groups on board and whatnot. And they asked if I want to make that the Cultural Olympiad campaign. So I said, sure. So I became the Cultural Olympiad campaign for a year. And then through that process, I met so many people, and such a big platform, even if we didn't win those 3 years leading up to it, I got connected to so many people, which is super cool.
Of course.
And I learned a lot about just what makes people move and inspire. And I also learned a lot about how culture is really a function of like people's circumstances and past, and then what they want to, what their traditions want to move them forward, towards in the future. So there's a lot of interesting cultural aspect. We had 104 countries, sharing like all their top artists and musicians, and we called it the 9 muses of modern culture, which were visual arts, music, performing arts, film, media, literature, fashion, design, and food. So I got the top of the world from all those 9 areas.
And your role was coordinating.
I was creative director, producer. I was curating and producing that whole thing. So
wow.
I was the head.
So you met hundreds of artists, musicians,
or seen their work, because they would send me all their work. And all of these had to be alive and breathing, so they couldn't be like past, dead. They had to be modern day, alive, breathing, top artists, musicians, whatever, designers.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so I got fed with all this creative creative ideas from around the world, which really blew my mind open. And some of the stuff you look at is just like, wow, you're just like immersed in so much beauty or so much exotic, expression. And it really kind of gave me a personal database of ideas that I could use and rejig and pull from and, push and pull. And also gave me a perspective like, oh, wow, I could be an artist. And this is why I'm an engineer and business guy, right? And like, oh, this is because you see so much, you get the bug. You're like, oh, I could create stuff. And then now I'm like one of the few people on the planet that has seen this much content, from around the world.
Out of curiosity, just taking a step back, is this a role that you lobbied for and really wanted, or is this a role that you kind of fell into?
No, I fell into it because I had this idea of creating this gateway to the world idea. And which is something I just wanted. It was my idea that I wanted. It's like, oh, I want to get these countries to feature their things in, my domes. And, one dome they could rent out and be the Swiss dome. They'll do like a wine tasting or a food tasting and then a culinary tasting. And another dome might be the French dome and they're doing some kind of fashion show. And another dome, the India dome, they might have some kind of dance presentation, And so it's like Epcot City across New York, or not Epcot City, but Disney Epcot, like rolled across New York to create like a new kind of World's Fair.
And you submit, and so you submitted to the board.
I didn't submit it. No, they just heard about what I was doing. They invited me to come meet with them, and they say, look, we have this, line item that's for a Culture Olympia campaign, and we've been hearing about what you're trying to do. They asked, hey, what if we told you we have a platform for you to do that? And
you were like, of course, this is.
Well, no, at first I was like, okay, they want to take over my idea. So then I'm like, well, tell me more. And, and I wanted to learn more about what they're saying and what that meant. And, pretty much in the end, it was like, okay, we have this line item, we have this budget, and you have full creative freedom to fulfill that under, these legal guidelines. So like, yeah. So then I was like, sure. Yeah. So that made sense. And then, that was really my turning point of, learning how powerful their arts could be to communicate culture. And what I found like working with the UN and kind of being in that world was that most, I'd say 95% of disagreements or misunderstandings are because of people not spending enough time to understand the other person's culture. And even within our own culture, there's subcultures. So if people actually try to understand the culture, I think most things can be resolved. That's when I discovered that.
And what, I mean, if you don't mind for the listeners, like what is your cultural background? How do you identify culturally?
My family is from India. So my dad and mom moved here from India. So, they came here with probably $100 in their pocket.
Wow.
And I had to start over. And my dad was doing really well in Bombay. They're from Bombay.
Okay.
And, or Mumbai now. But, so he was kind of the city engineer for one of the big municipalities within Bombay. And when he came over, he had to start over. And so he's back in, doing construction work.
Were you born in the U.S.?
Yeah, I was born in the U.S. So I was born, my dad was here. I was born 5 years after my dad came over.
Okay.
So, and my mom followed 6 months later. And then they married here in the U.S.
Very cool.
Yeah. So they were engaged there, but married here. And, he kept getting, in engineering construction, you go from project to project. So when a project's done, you get laid off unless there's another one lined up, or you find another project somewhere else, and you just kind of hop that way. So, at least at that time on the construction services side. So he kept getting laid off and then rehired, laid off and rehired. And eventually he decided, I'm tired of being laid off and I'm about to have a kid, so I'm going to start this company. So him and my mom started our family business.
It's a family business started by your parents together.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful. What did you learn from your two parents working together like that? Do you think there's anything?
Oh yeah, a lot. So much. Oh my God, yeah. I mean, working with family members is tough in certain cases, but also super rewarding. And like, some of the a lot of cases, some of the people you could really trust, because they've been part of your journey and, with common goals and, and Indian families are very nuclear. So we work as a team in general. Or I noticed like in America, the US families are very, fiercely independent, and individualistic. Right. So, I was telling somebody the other day, like, gosh, in the US, the, parents can't wait to get their kids out of their house at 18, to go to college, then they feel free.
Well, it depends. Jewish moms want to keep us there.
Oh yeah, well, the same with Indian moms. So Indian moms don't want us to leave ever. Like even in India, even the married couples, they move in, stay with the parents until they start having kids. Then they move out their own house into their own house. So you're married, your 20s or 30, whatever. You're still living at home, and they love that. So Jewish moms and Indian moms are
there's some cultural sharing.
Some cultural shift, cultural sharing there. But but in America, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for them to get out of the house at 18, and then you get a job and move on, get your own apartment, whatever else. So
and then American children repay the favor by putting our grandparents in nursing homes rather than
right,
3 generations under one roof, like definitely in China and in India.
Well. Yeah, I don't even know if we have nursing homes in India yet, but
it's totally different.
It's a totally different way of family. Like it's so it's just a different. And they both have their pros and cons. I mean, like when you're individualistic and very focused on yourself versus family, you could go much further. You're not being held back. It's not everyone does, but when you have a family or you have a nuclear setup, you actually have way more support, higher chance of success. So it's kind of trade-offs, right? So.
Yeah, and I think it can be isolating, to not have that nuclear family support.
Yeah.
Right. And you're
literally on your own.
Go do your thing. Right.
Yeah. So then you develop other families, right? You develop friends and whatever. And, but eventually somehow a lot of people always end up back home, especially the millennial generation, right? Yeah. They get out there and they realize, okay, I don't have as much, they run out of money, and then they come back home.
I was going to say that's another topic for another day about millennials and how we don't own homes, and more of us are moving in with our parents, right? Yeah. It's crazy. I don't know if that's, that might be the next shift in American culture is we'll see more families staying together.
Yeah. That's a number of reasons for that. I mean, that's just a capitalistic structural like a system, I don't say system failure, but a system bug in our current economic capitalistic system, right? Which is why that's happening. I mean, inflation rate rising faster than wages, which causes, instead of one parent now working to support a family, now 2 parents have to work, support a family, and now the 2 parents are working to support a family and just themselves, and the kid can't get a job, then now 3, so it's increased. And then when 2 people are working, then the kids are off partying or with drugs again, and wrapped it with the wrong crowds, then you start seeing a family degradation, take place, and it's hard to recover from that. Now the kids are in drugs, the parents are like trying to keep everything afloat, by both being working, and no one's there watching, or guiding, the kids, and then so the kids have to learn to be independent even earlier. But how could they if they are not in the right environment, So you see families in this country starting to not, be as coherent as they were in the 50s or 60s or 40s or whatever. And that's purely a economic. I mean, I'd say the economic structure is what's driving that culture shift. Yeah. So it's interesting how different things can influence culture. Economics being a big thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I definitely see a trend. My sister, moved back in with my parents, and actually I think my niece was born while my sister and her husband lived with my parents. I think it's, it's harder to, to get started. It's harder to launch. And that idea of the American dream of we're going to kind of surpass our parents, at least through, economic means, I think is slowly fading away a little bit in this country. People, are concerned that they might not have a better, quote unquote, air quotes, better life than their parents economically now.
Right.
And it's crazy how that shifted. But I guess going back to, to culture and where you're from. So you grew up in a traditionally Indian household, but in the United States.
Yeah. Traditionally, I would say we're traditional. My parents tend to be not traditional from most Indian, like the Indian culture.
Okay.
But they had a love marriage. They didn't have an arranged marriage.
Oh, wow.
So they dated actually for 3 years secretly before they decided to get married.
Is that why they left?
No. My dad just heard it was this during the Vietnam War. So there's what they call a brain drain. So they're trying to import engineers and doctors.
Got it.
And he was one of those qualified people that they wanted to bring over. So thought it'd be a cool adventure. And
yes.
So he was in it for the adventure. And then my mom followed. So
That's so cool. So not traditional in the sense it wasn't an arranged marriage.
Yeah, they tend to be on, if you look at the traditional, scale in their culture from where they grew up, they're more on the rebellion side. But their rebellion side is still very conservative for what I am, like in my lifestyle. So
that's another trend. It's less and less conservative as the years go on.
Yeah, depending on, it's all relative, right? So conservatism and liberalism is super relative.
So okay, going again, just taking it back. So now you're kind of working for the New York Olympics bid.
Yeah, I'm part of the bid. I'm working on that area, developing that concept of cultural Olympic campaign, what that would look like, and that was super fun. I just got exposed to so many things, and that really, that is probably the beginning of my artist career, so to speak, or shifted me and showed me or inspired me. Kind of like when before that I was around a bunch of entrepreneurs and going to these entrepreneurial conferences. That gave me the entrepreneurial bug, and that's when I moved from being engineer, family business owner, or operator, to being an entrepreneur, and then entrepreneur to being an artist.
So I feel that entrepreneurship in a way is like art.
Yeah. And anything creation.
Exactly.
Anything creation, but it's a different form. It's a different mindset.
How's it differ?
So when I look at the art world, it's like forms of expression, so and there's overlap, there's significant overlap, but the nuances that differentiate the two is forms of expression from an individual, sometimes a group, but usually an individual, whether it's a music piece, sometimes you have collaborators and whatnot, or a dance piece or performance or a design or fashion or architecture, all those things. Where being an entrepreneur, building a company, there's a lot of management as a part of that. You still have the common marketing, this, that, but the creation part is like, okay, I'm going to create a platform that's going to do this, this, and this, and this, and this is going to be in service of people to use, right? Or I'm going to, like Uber or Google, that like this is like these are platforms that other people can use, and then they add some artistic flair to it, or give it a creative bend. But it's more utility. Startups tend to be more utility focused versus just pure free creative expression focus. So it's a different area of the brain you tap into. At least I noticed that. Like when I'm in because I do both. Yeah. So I notice the difference in me. Like it's when I'm in engineering utility mind, utility creation mind, it's very analytical. It's very very specific, very detailed, like highly detailed, and in the way of like A has to lead to B, which has to lead to C, which has to lead to D. It has to be very specifically designed for it to work.
Because when you said detailed, I was thinking about
art's detailed too.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I mean, I'm trying to think of the right words, but it's like it's algorithmic. Like at least when we're designing roads, we're creating a road, right? So and there is some creative room to to say, okay, maybe you curve it this way, or a bridge even, like, okay, maybe you go from suspension bridge to this bridge, but the majority of the thought ends up being in how to keep it from falling down.
Would you agree with this? I think what I'm hearing is that maybe being an entrepreneur is more outcome driven, whereas being an artist is more about the process of creating.
Yeah, that's a great way of describing it. Yeah, I think being an entrepreneur is if you're an entrepreneur with investors' money, your focus is returning the investors' money with a return, right? As part, in addition to putting something together that that consumers would like, or your whoever your consumer, your buyers are, which is how you return money. So there's a machine. If you're creating art, you need to probably return money and do these things, whatever. But the process of creation, you don't have lives at risk in a lot of cases, at least the things I've been involved with. If a bridge falls and people die, or
or if a festival fails.
Festival fails and people get pissed off. And, exactly. So in this case, it's it's just a different mindset. There's a different mindset, at least when I start. So when I'm playing the piano and doing performance, I'm in a different state than I am when I'm, building a business around a piano. Here's another difference. Like when I'm creating art, whether it's music or I'm writing or authoring or visual arts, whatever it is, I'm, a lot of it's coming from a different part of my body, also like a different level. Like my heart, my soul area is like, it's more soul stirring type of creation. Where if I'm creating a platform or a business, it's more mental, it's more intellectual.
Yes.
So it's more in my head versus kind of down here, my chest, heart, and soul area. So, and I could feel the difference. Like,
do you believe that the two can be aligned either through art or business?
Yeah, they should be. I mean, ideally, it's not like it's all there, or all in one or all in the other. It's both. They're both active. I'm just saying the majority, like one tends to be more dominant than the other, depending on what you're doing at what stage it's at. So if you move in a creative process, some people are fully in the creative process as a creative director. They're constantly creating, like a filmmaker. They're more in that space. They still got to manage a budget, so they got to move back and forth. But the majority of their time is spent down there. Obviously they're using their brain to think and process and ideate and all that stuff. But it's just where the energy centers are more active is what I find. So yeah, it's just a different, expressions, and, the expressions tend to be in form of products or experiences.
Yeah.
Where platforms are more persistent. Well, it's not just platform. You could have an engineering business like we did, but it's still like a machine that you have a bunch of people running, versus something that kind of stands on its own.
And machines are more mental, more kind of intellectually driven or numbers driven or process driven. Whereas
if you think of a machine, an engineer builds a machine, right? So if you're a businessmen are, human capital engineers, right? So, or human resource engineers, or just resource engineers. So they have to manage a bunch of resources to create an outcome. So create a product of something of value. Not even a product, could be a service, but something of value.
And you're not, and I think you're not saying that there's not art in that. There is art.
Oh, there's art. Yeah.
The element. There is heart in that often, especially
Absolutely.
if there's an entrepreneur that's passionate about a cause, but it's more, you need the faculties of the mind.
It's just a different, you're just using different parts of your brain, is all I'm saying. Or different parts of an artistic creative process pulls from different resources in your mind and heart. And the entrepreneurial process does something similar, and there's overlap for sure, but it pulls from different areas.
I think the reason why I'm really like pulling at this is because I think I romanticize about the entrepreneur that has the heart center kind of mission driven focus, thinking about the customer, thinking about all the stakeholders, right? Yeah. For example, I know you work on climate change, right? That is really like a mission driven focus that I think comes from a desire to make the world better.
Right.
For others, and yet it's, of course, we need our intellectual faculties to get it done. So it's interesting to hear kind of the separateness. Maybe it's also because I've been an entrepreneur in the past, and I feel like I can see how jumping from entrepreneurship to art, right, is it's not as wide of a gap, I think, as maybe jumping from just being an engineer specifically to art, or I don't know.
Well, even engineering, we still use creative judgment and tools, and it's just how much of it. Like when you're creating an art piece, it's more creative. Versus engineering, a lot of it's prescribed. These things work, so you're just taking these things and reassembling and rearranging them till it fits the plan or whatever you're trying to focus, or whatever outcome you're focused on. But it's just a spectrum, right? It's just a spectrum of creative versus analytical.
Yeah.
And
some say right and left brain. I don't know if that's still a framework.
I mean, a lot of people refer to it as it's not accurate, but
I was gonna say
we use all parts of our brain all the time. But the idea is like, if you're analytical, you're far, you're on the right, and if you're creative, you're on the left. Is kind of how I look at it. So
you become an artist. You're meeting with all these creatives,
and just
and
like
you're just like sponging it up.
Yeah, that's kind of what happened. And it kind of opened up this, and I've always loved art. So I've always loved music. I've always loved, seeing artwork. And I've always loved, I saw Cirque du Soleil my very first time, like always dreamed, like, gosh, how amazing would it be to create a show like that?
Yeah.
And like how complicated it would be. Even when it's listening to like some of my favorite bands on, back in the day, like all the layers. Like, I don't know how to, like, it blew my mind, like, that people could actually create things like that. And then years later, I found myself creating these types of things, shows and music and, visual art pieces and things like that, I was able to dissect the layers, like, oh, here's a drum layer, here's a string layer. So I was able to pull it apart in my head to see how they constructed it. And that's just pure, I think that's just because I'm an engineer and I think that way. But
what you just described reminds me of what you said earlier about the way that we learn. And it's not until we can teach that we've truly learned something, because we can simplify it and distill it down. And this art, like a song, for example, is so complex with so many different moving pieces and parts, and you can peel the layers, as you said, and yet it comes across so simply, so smoothly.
Right.
I think that's
the idea. It needs to, your mind or body needs to digest it, right? And so it needs to absorb it, to process it, to engage it, to actually understand and appreciate it. So as all these things come together in harmony, which is where harmony comes in, right? And then, and you see the reaction, the human reaction, or any, even be a plant reacting to it, whatever the reaction is, you see the reaction to it, that it's organized in such, or composed in such a way, or arranged in such a way that it evokes feeling or an emotion or a state. And then that it was done, well.
Do plants respond to music?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, there are studies where you play classical music to a plant, it grows. I forgot what the study was, but I remember reading that a long time ago. And yeah, so just playing classical music to plants, the plants were growing healthier. Or
I talk to my plants.
Yeah, that does too. Music, communicating with them, and actually there's a study done that people that talk to their plants versus people that, verbally abuse their plants, verbally abused plants would die quicker or deteriorate quicker than those that talk to them with love and, feeling and emotion. And same with music. That was another one. There's all sorts of studies with plants. It's super interesting. That's a whole world of really interesting studies of how plants respond and react to things, even light frequencies. Like not blocked from sunlight, but using certain frequencies can accelerate their growth, or sound frequencies.
There's so much to learn from them. Like, one of my favorite things about Planet Earth, do you watch Planet Earth? So it's this show on Netflix, but it was like when HD TVs came out, it was like the coolest thing ever, Planet Earth. You know, you could see like in slow motion, like the happenings of the world kind of firsthand, like you spot a snow leopard firsthand or whatever. But they do this thing where they film plants, but they speed it up. Right, like they'll speed it up like 1,000 times.
Oh yeah.
So you see the way like that the vines grow and kind of communicate with one another, and the leaves are like talking, right? And it's just happening in such slow motion that we don't even realize it.
Right.
So it's cool. So going back to your transition from entrepreneur to artist, how did that manifest itself? What did you start doing?
Well, I bought a game company, and we developed a cool game engine platform, make it really easy for independent game developers to build games. And so I started producing games, and as part of that process, so game design, game development is so interesting. It's so fun. It's so complex because like even in like when what's fun about game design is it took me back to my virtual reality days at Modus, because I we had to like really figure out what engages people and keeps them engaged. And all game design is about what pulls people in and what keeps them there. It's how you design game mechanics. Is if it's too easy, people get bored. If it's too complicated, they give up. So what is that balance in that moment? And then how do you create a chain of those balances to keep them moving as long as you want them to move, through the game? So you got to keep throwing short-term carrots. You have a long-term arc, that has to make sense, that they feel like there's some kind of big reward at the end. And then you got to give them freedom to explore. You got them freedom to do stuff, make mistakes. And then you got to really understand what's going to, especially in today's day and age, like what people see so much and they get bored so quickly,
our attention
spans are, the size of a gnat these days, so it's like,
it keeps going down and down.
Right?
It's crazy. So I think I mentioned to you that one of the goals of this show is to raise awareness for for kind of social media addiction and the challenges that we all face with this supercomputer in our pockets. And I'd love to hear kind of more your views, if you have any, on how game design is incorporated there,
Oh
or
yeah,
what
for
you
sure.
see.
Yeah, I mean, game design is incorporated everywhere. We've actually applied game design principles or mechanics into even company building. Like how do you design human resource systems to actually motivate employees to stay engaged and keep producing
Mm.
at high levels? Usually if they're really engaged and passionate, interested in their area, they produce more versus they're just being paid for it. So how do you keep them engaged, and then how can you tell what's that feedback loop to tell them when you're not? So same with these things. I mean, these things are attention addiction machines, right? So they're attention addiction drugs essentially. So
Yeah.
and part of it's physiological. I mean, when you have a flickering screen, your adrenals get hit.
Mm.
So it keeps you in your adrenals in an engaged, like a very subtle fight or flight type of thing. So the flickering screens that hits your eyes, your brains to, signals your adrenals to keep you pumped,
Mm.
and then when you're pumped, you're engaged more. And unless you constantly, it becomes harder and harder, to pull away from these things, so flickering screens are part of the issue. So now if that was in the form of a book, it's much easier to
Mm.
pull away because you don't have this thing pumping your adrenals. Um, this is like when I taught the 6-year-old math. I was tutoring a 6-year-old for back, this is a while ago, but and he was from divorced parents, and he just had a really bad attitude, really bratty, had temper tantrums all the time, just really angry, had a lot of built up anger at 6, and it's just from what he was going through. And so in tutoring and math, they're starting first grade, single digit addition, 1 + 2 = 3, and so I could tell he just was not paying attention. He just didn't care. He just, his attention span was super short. He'd play game. He had his Game Boys. He'd play games all the time. He'd watch TV all the time,
Mm.
and he'd eat junk food all the time. So the first thing I did is I took him, just to get his attention back. And they're about to put him on ADHD medication too.
Yeah,
So
it seems to be the answer nowadays for
pills.
any.
Pills.
Yeah.
So the first thing I did was I said, before you do put him on meds, let me try something. So I pulled him off all screens.
Mm.
So games, TVs, whatever, all screens, and gave him allocated times, 30 minutes a day, and then like 2 hours a day on the weekend, and then repurpose his food. So it's all healthy, organic stuff. And then between those two, and then every time he got emotionally, got angry, I tell him, okay, sit on this couch here. Now it's a punishment, but just until you can figure out why you're angry. And then come tell me why you're angry. And then, so he'd sit on the couch when I get angry, which was often. And then he'd come tell me, okay, I'm angry because this. And I ask him, well, is this true? And then after a while, he would start to recognize that he's angry. The reason he's angry wasn't really accurate, when he'd start to think about, well, is it true? And does it really matter? So after a while, about a couple of weeks, he started recognizing himself when he was angry and started self-directing him to the couch. He'd be talking to me, he goes, okay, I'm angry, but I'll be right back. And he'd go to the couch.
Wow.
Simmer
1
down.
week. That's it.
About 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. And then he'd come and tell me, okay, this is what I figured out. And then in about 4 weeks, he just stopped getting angry because he became self-aware of his anger. And during that time also, because of the screens, not pumping his adrenals, not keeping him in a fight or flight, type of state all the time, and his food becoming healthy, his learning abilities went up. So from that month on, his learning ability scaled significantly to the point where he learned like full-blown basic algebra in 4 months at the age of 6. So you went from one single digit additions to full 20 by 20 times tables, to division, multiplication, all the variations of that, to algebra, to graphing, and even knowing square roots and exponents, things. By the time you're in like 6th, 7th grade, he was learning at 1st grade. And part of it was how I taught him and the pattern I was teaching him based on the stuff I learned in the past. And then the other part was just enhancing his abilities and desire to want to learn. And the more he learned, the more confident he was feeling in himself, more confidence he was gaining. So he started building self-worth, and that self-worth started like translating to kids in school. There'd be bullies he would talk down. And not only would he talk down, he wouldn't like talk him down saying you suck. He'd talk him down saying, look, I know you want to be friends, so I'll be your friend. And then he engaged them and embraced them, and then boom, they would transform from bullies to just loving kids. And it happened. I remember him telling us like what he told the person. I was like, wow. It's like
he was 6 years old.
6 years old. It's
incredible.
He went from a temper tantrum, brat to like a little Buddha, walking around school, asking his teacher, "Do you know what the square root of 81 was?"
And part of that was due to, I mean, there was a whole program, and obviously he had you as a mentor one-on-one, which I think is important. But part of that, as you said, was minimizing the screen time.
Yeah, that got his attention back.
Yeah,
diet and screen time, and then emotional management. So those three things, got his attention to focus back.
And I think what's so detrimental about kind of not just the phone use, but the phone use for social media. You mentioned him getting back his sense of self-worth in a lot of ways, right? And so now we're not only using our phones, but we're using our phones to compare ourselves to others. And actually, it's a detriment to our self-worth, because when we see these images of photoshopped women, it might lead to some body dysmorphia issues, or someone on a vacation wonder why I'm not on vacation all the time. This person travels all the time, whatever. So it's kind of like a combo factor.
Yeah, that's funny. A friend of mine told me, there's always someone on vacation. So everyone is at a detriment, because someone on your feed is there's always one person on your feed that's on vacation, and it appears like everyone's on vacation all the time.
Yeah.
So it's and we don't see the gaps. We don't notice the gaps. We only notice the pictures. And every day there's somebody on vacation somewhere in the world. So on your feed. So it's an impossible thing to reach. You can't always be on vacation all the time, and or at least most people can. And so not being able to separate that, a lot of people can't, and then start comparing, and then they start feeling bad about themselves, even if they may have an amazing life, and but they still start comparing. I don't know. Comparison. There's a quote: "Comparison is the thief of all joy." Right. So
yeah.
So it's
true, but and yet we subject ourselves to these massive comparison engines that we check into pretty much regularly.
Yeah.
Whether it be it's meant to be a connection engine, but it becomes a comparison engine.
Exactly.
In a lot of ways. And so I want to dive deeper into that subject with you, because I'm curious about your relationship to social media. We're connected on Facebook, and I know you post relatively often, but you also have a mindfulness practice, and you're focused very much on your health. So I want to get back to that later on, but I think it's important for people to understand a little bit more about you and your background, because you're talking about tutoring and changing this student's lifestyle, and what makes you uniquely qualified, for that type of work, and recommending a diet and things like that.
Oh yeah. So I didn't go to school for teaching, and if I did, I probably wouldn't have done the things I did. I tend to love, it goes back to my engineering part of my brain. Like, I love to deconstruct things and see how things work. And I really love to deconstruct things that are not tangible. Like, some people call them metaphysical things, like our mind, our imagination, our creative abilities, how we think, how we perceive fear. I spent 15 years researching fear to figure out how fear works, and came to like all these really beautiful realizations and truths. And
were you have such a varied background, and you've done so many things. I mean, were you researching this fear at the time that you were working on bringing 100 plus cultures together to New York City, or is it more like
that was actually part of my experiment, because part of it was, so when I figured out on fear, so I started researching fear when I did my first engineering structural building job after I graduated from college. It's a mid-rise 30-40 story building in Orlando, and it was just slabs and columns, and I was going up the open shaft elevator the first day, and for the first time I was like starting to feel my heart palpitate, my hands sweat. I'm like, what's going on? And I realized, oh my God, I'm afraid of heights. And I was going to be on that job for 6 months, and every day, my job was to actually lean over the edge.
That happens to me every time I'm going to get a blood test, by the way.
Okay. Yeah. So I had to lean over the edge and check the rebar to make sure the proper amount of rebar was there to match the plans. So every day I'm like looking around, make sure no one's looking, crawl on my belly, crawl 20 feet to the edge, look, really quickly look, and memorize the plans, so I don't have to like try to compare it there. Just make sure I count the rebar and make sure I measure the
And you're 30 stories up. You're not connected to anything.
No, not connected to anything. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
God, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Actually.
I mean, you have a slab, but underneath you, a floor, but you're not like, I wasn't like walking across I-beams, like, back in New York, like those pictures I see there are cool. But, I was definitely, standing on the edge of these slabs with nothing to protect me, so I, so I discovered that I had a fear of heights, and I do this every day until one day I figured out that, well, a contractor asked me if there's a concrete truck that showed up, and I walked to the edge, look around, didn't see it, came back, and then reported it back and thought to myself, like, oh my God, wait, I didn't feel any fear during that when I walked over there. So I went back, looked around, all of a sudden I could start feeling the what if thoughts. What if I slip? What if I fall? What if I lose balance? What if? And then I felt a fear, symptoms of heart palpitations, sweaty hands, and nervousness, anxiety. Jump back. And then when I realized, well, if I kept looking for the truck, I didn't feel fear. When I stopped looking for the truck, I did. And I realized, what became the first principle in my hacking fear book that I've been writing, is fear is based on time. It's always in the future. So if I'm present, there's no room for fear to exist. So it's always in the future. What if something happens? So, and many times it's triggered by the past. It's always experienced in the present. So
the brain is just like a giant if-then engine.
It could be. It's programming, though. It's social programming. So it doesn't have to be. And in fact, we're programmed into that. We're not naturally that way. So
what's the natural state of our
natural state is the opposite of fear, which is what I call trust. And I say there's one source energy, I call flow, or another word for it is love. A lot of people would say fear and love are opposites. I would say I would add a few more nuances to them. I'd say it's not fear and love, it's fear and trust, and love is always present. Love, that flow, that energy, life force is always there. It's just when you're in a state of fear, you're contracting your pipeline, accessing more of that flow or more of that love. And when you're in a state of trust, you're opening yourself to more of that. Because when my girlfriend's upset at me and she's in a panic, kind of a fear state with me, it doesn't mean there's still love there.
Yeah,
it's just maybe less of it's flowing through her, and I'm not feeling as much, but it's still there, right? So love and trust are opposites. So I found that the more I exercise my ability to trust, the more you trust, the less you fear, and the more I trust, the more flow I get. That enables me to actually do more and accomplish more, and push through things much easier. So I started just practicing how to be in trust more, and then that translated to what I was doing in New York. I mean, I just kind of trusted in that things would go. I didn't have much fear. And because I was creating something, you can't create out of fear. It's very hard to create out of fear because fear, it blocks you.
Yes.
Trust opens you up to create flow. So I just kind of was just moving, moment by moment in that whole process that led me to this opportunity to do this stuff with the city and the Olympics and whatnot. So, which I never imagined before. If I imagined it before, I wouldn't even know how to get there because I wasn't known in the city. So the fearlessness, I kept moving forward and kept trusting, allowed me to emerge into this opportunity. And that's been true pretty much for most things in my life. It's the more I trust, the more things flow to me, or the more gravity I create, the more things attract to me, or the more things I move into that are aligned with what my intentions are. So it goes into like, what do I really want to, what my underlying intentions are. Goals come from intentions, and then expectations come from goals. So these formed outcomes of this goal is your expectation. But if you don't get too attached to that expectation or that outcome, then you leave room for creative forces to find better outcomes for you if that's not the right outcome. So,
and it taps into me for a word that resonated with me last night that I'll bring up again, which is surrender. And I think about Mickey Simpson and the Surrender Experiment as a book that also inspired me, and I think that's where it's one of the conclusions that he came to as well was, just trusting in what was presented to him and flowing with that.
Yeah.
And so I hear, I feel trust and surrender are so intertwined, but also so difficult at times.
Surrender is a state of trust. So these are all states of trust. I would say like all positive emotions emerge through trust. Surrender is one of them. Gratitude, humility, courage, aspiration, ambition would be on the fear side. So aspiration would be the equivalent.
I like that. So ambition is driven by
trying to prove
a fear of not being enough.
Exactly.
aspiration is being motivated by a desire to be in service or to create.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, you're not, one's filling a void, trying to fill a void of worth. And the other is it's more based on inspiration and wanting to, like I said, create and be in service or do something amazing for something. Both upward mobility, just different drivers. So it's a very subtle too. That's a very subtle.
Well, and you've had a unique experience in your life where you contracted Lyme disease, and you had to probably deal with the fear that comes along with that, and obviously have learned so much and been able to share so much with others due to that experience.
Yeah, that's one of the scariest times. I thought when I was confronted with the lion in the safari, that put me. I mean, that was one of my most primal fear times, when literally a lion walked up to me. I was in the road ranger, the Jeep, and it's open Jeep. So and my arm, he's literally like as far as you are from me right now.
Yeah, and we've all seen the videos of lions, jumping into Range Rovers.
And I could feel his breath on my arm, and
oh my God,
just staring. And then even the ranger was freaked out, said, "Don't move, don't breathe," And so I moved into my trust. I said, everything's gonna be fine. And in this minute, I just did my breathing and just moved into trust state. Within literally like seconds, I would say, the lion got up and walked away. But it's almost like it could sense my fear, it could sense my heartbeat, my anxiety. And so I thought that was probably one of the most scary moments I experienced that I moved through. But with Lyme, it was even worse. It was because I didn't know what was happening. There, I knew what was going on. And I knew, okay, well, if it pulls me out, I'm going to get shredded, So I knew I could see what I was up against. With Lyme, nobody knew it was Lyme for a year and a half. I had to figure it out. So that was like my whole body completely malfunctioning. And every day was a different experience, a different malfunction. And I didn't know what was going to happen next. So it was like being constant, stress of you don't know what the next day brings you. And the next day may be the end of you, and not knowing that. And you have no control over it. You have at least no even perceptual control of it, because you have no idea what's happening, where it's coming from. So,
and were you cultivating? I mean, I guess one, just for people listening, like Lyme disease, I think is a misunderstood, kind of disease that's out there. Could you explain like the physiological effect that it has?
Yeah, it's essentially it's a certain type of bacteria called a spirochete, and a lot of times it's contracted from a tick. And although now there's research showing that it's not ticks anymore, and there are other forms of contracting Lyme disease, and a lot of people haven't. 80% of Lyme patients, I remember seeing a paper on this, but 80% of Lyme patients that have Lyme don't remember tick bite. So, and I'm one of them. I don't remember a tick bite, and I was in LA and I wasn't hiking, so I don't know how it happened. But when you get it, it's a spirochete bacteria that drills through your tissue into your nervous system, and then causes nervous system inflammation. And when your nervous system's inflamed, your body ends up contracting different symptoms. And the symptoms of Lyme disease tend to be diseases that doctors categorize. So MS is a disease, but from a Lyme perspective, it's just a symptom. So people that have Lyme actually can develop MS.
Wow.
I had MS for a bit and rotated through it. Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, like all these, I had the shakes, I had the memory losses. Like one day I watched my memory just fade. And I was aware of it fading, like, holy shit, I'm losing my memory. And I had to like sit there and breathe, and I watched it come back. And so I rotated through every textbook disease. I feel like probably 200 textbook diseases I experienced, just because my nervous system would be inflamed here, then it would change, it'd be inflamed there, whatever. And it kept, bubbling up different types.
And at this time, you didn't even realize what you had.
First year and a half, I didn't. Yeah, the worst of it, I didn't realize.
And when was this?
Started January 2012.
Okay. So a few years ago.
Yeah, so 2012 to 2016, I'd say. It was my 4-year window. And then, so I just moved through these different things. And, there are times when my body would completely crash. My whole nervous system would crash. And, I had blindness bouts. I had all sorts of crazy experiences and symptoms. And, so night, my body, even like your body breathing, like that wasn't functioning properly. Like at night, I wake up and my body wasn't in sync with the breathing pattern was not in sync. I could feel like this weird phase gap of my breathing to my body, where I'd have to create manual breathing rhythms until like it came back into phase lock. It's the weird stuff. Like I couldn't take anything for granted.
So by 2012, had you already kind of cultivated your framework on fear?
Oh yeah, I was finishing the book until this happened. Yeah, and then this happened. Like, oh shit, maybe because now I have depression and panic attacks, anxiety. I've never experienced that before. So like at that level where I could tell it wasn't me perceptually generating this stuff. It was like something was pushing it into, like forcing it on me. Like, so I knew this wasn't me, like creating these fears. So I still
granted an opportunity to really practice.
Yeah, well,
an opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah, it showed me that there's another angle to this where you can generate fear from, and it's physiologically induced fear versus perceptually induced fear. So instead of top down, it's bottom up, and that was the next 4 years of my life figuring that out, how that works, and that's where I understood flow and discovered, at least in my framework, how I describe flow and what that is as life force. In a flow state is when you're actually accessing a significant amount of life force, or for a period of time, and that allows you to do all these things. And and you have life force and your physical body, they're connected. So it's the more life force you're accessing, that means your neurotransmitters, your dopamine, your serotonin levels are raising, and all these other things are happening. So, and to do that, you're either perceptually or physically doing certain things to trigger accessing more flow or being in a flow state, so to speak. But flow states are peak performance modes. They're like these short-term spikes.
Yeah. What's the kind of common flow state analogy that people tend to use is like a basketball player that just can't miss a shot, right?
Runner's high, for example, is an example of flow. When you're just on autopilot and you're just running and don't even, like you're not even there.
You don't feel things.
Yeah,
so
you're in the
first
zone.
mile and a half, it's like, oh, this is terrible.
Yeah, you're in the zone, right?
In the zone, exactly.
So, a good example when you're experiencing flow is when, what normally would look like effort is effortless. It's just everything's happening. You're in a rhythm. So what all flow is when you're in a rhythm. You're in a rhythm and you're riding that rhythm. So the wave is moving you. You're not putting effort into it, right? So it's like when you're surfing and you're riding the wave, and and you're connected to the wave. You are the wave, right? So then you're not putting any effort into it. You're just riding it through, and that's what it feels like to be in a flow state. And that's when you become hyper intuitive. You become stronger, faster, smarter. You heal quicker. You're super present. Time dilates. It slows down or speeds up. It doesn't stay in our normal states. And so you have all these different interesting effects that happen when you're in a flow state. But what I was interested in, these peak performance moments were fine and cool, but you're only in them for minutes or maybe up to an hour.
Yeah.
But when I go back down to my default state, I was at this really low default state that I couldn't really function well. So I was like, well, how do I get my default state up? So I started referring to the peak performance moments, your flow state, like the community refers to it too. But the default state, call it your state of flow, like your persistent state of flow or your default flow. And so then I spent the next 4 years just figuring out how to raise my default state. That's a whole different set of principles. There's that I figured out how to learn and practice and experiment with. And
what are a few of those principles?
Yeah. So when you're in a flow state, things that trigger flow states is being present. Your skill to challenge ratio needs to be certain. You have to have slightly higher challenge than your skill level. And these are like short-term drivers to move you into a performance state. But if you want to add more flow to your baseline in a persistent way, some of this is, there are 5 areas that I realized where we access flow. One's your physiology. So, whatever you put in and on your body. So your food and your diet and, even the products you put on your hair and your makeup and stuff, they could create toxins in your body that could block flow.
Or potentially the phone in your pocket.
The EMF. Yeah, exactly. Radiation, EMF, all those things. They could create toxic blockages in your flow, physiologically, even epigenetically, right? So your physiology
and epigenetically means that there is a change in your underlying genetic code,
right,
from environmental factors.
Well, not changing your genetic code, but certain genes are being expressed or unexpressed.
Okay.
Yeah. And you could alter your genetic code too, in my opinion. But epigenetically it refers to expression or
So your genes go on permission. And off to express different attributes in the individual.
That actually causes inflammation or reduce or turns off inflammation, things like that. So they could create blocks in your physiology, and that's where you get these symptoms or diseases and pains and all those types of things. So second is your mindset. So attitude, belief systems, programming.
And this is where trust came so much into play.
Fear,
and
trust, all that, exactly.
Your work on fear and your work on cultures and
Right.
differences. How, as you said, as you're programmed, right? From a young age, culture is our environmental programming in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Environmental being like your human environmental programming versus like outdoors. Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, both. I mean, all of it. Your circumstances, which includes everything. That's your program. That's the how do you adapt and live within those environments and cultures, which has to do with that plus the past, right? So, and then so the mindset ultimately boils down to attitude, right? But yeah, it's belief systems, it's programming, it's emotional states.
What mindsets? So trust being one. You mentioned a few. So trust can express itself as gratitude, as aspiration, as courage. What else for cultivating
humility.
A flow state? Humility.
Yeah. So what I found with the long-term flow drivers, gratitude is one of those. Service, altruism is another. When you're altruistic and you're doing things without expecting a return, that can induce long-term flow. Curiosity is another one. So people that are more curious end up living longer. It's almost like a natural form of life extension. I found.
Interesting.
Like in a research I found, like for example, you have, I wrote this book on Nikola Tesla called The Inventor, or this graphic novel. And when I was teaching in Montessori school, I had them all research inventors. They read the book and then they all researched inventors in that same time frame and did a report on them. And what I noticed in all of them was like all these inventors, like Edison, like Tesla lived to be 86 years old. He's born in 1848. Or 1852, sorry. 1852.
I wonder what the equivalent is in our years now.
Yeah, a lot more. Because what's interesting is, so he lived to be, that old, right? Edison lived to be 84. So he was 86. Edison's 84. Lord Kelvin was 75. All these inventors, scientists, and engineers, that group of people during the that were born in the mid 1800s lived to be between their 70 and 80s. But the average lifespan for people over the age of 5 during that same time frame was 52.
Wow.
So that's after the age of 5, so it doesn't include all the child diseases.
So in a way, that common thread of curiosity between those.
So that was my suspicion. That's what I theorized or hypothesized, and then I started researching more, and I found actual studies that show that people that have, there's a study that had 2,000 people, in the study between the ages of I think like 55 and 65 or something like that, and they measured their curiosity levels, and the ones that were more curious lived longer than the others, and the ones that are less developed neurogenetic diseases much earlier. And so
I don't know if this is curiosity, but my grandmother, God bless her, is 99 years old, and she's been doing the New York Times crossword puzzle for the Sunday one, like every week for the last like 30 years, and we attribute she's sharp as a tack.
Stimulation. So that's mental. So she used her brain faculty. So yeah, she's brain. So I don't know if curiosity is much as stimulation, but yeah, I mean there's both. But curiosity, like a good example, the curiosity I'm talking about is. Well, no, it's true. There's curiosity there because she's discovering.
She has to learn a lot of new things every time she does one of those puzzles.
There's novelty. So there's novelty. So novelty is a driver of flow.
Oh, cool.
And so if you discover, explore, or try something new, travel new places, new people, all that stuff, that increases flow in your relationships, things like that, or finding novelty in your existing relationship, finding new things to pursue, new things to try with each other, new things to explore, together or with each other. So that's all novelty. You don't have to have new relationships every time to be novel, which is what some people do that. But you can create new novelty within your existing relationship. So but like Stephen Hawking is a great example. He had ALS and Lou Gehrig's disease, and he's supposed to die at the age of 22, 23 is what they predicted, and he lived to the age of 76. It's insane, right? That's 50 years longer than what they predicted, which is the lifespan
almost entirely due to his
that was pure curiosity. He kept uncovering the secrets of life and what he perceived as the secrets of life or secrets of the universe, and so that kept him going. And I found that, so when I start putting it into my framework, it's like if your curiosity, if you have high degrees of curiosity, then your body follows your mind. Your curiosity will create enough flow to keep your body, so your body can keep up with your mind.
Why do you think that we have this saying, curiosity killed the cat? Just like to bring up the flip side.
Just because anything is, But cats are fun. Yeah, curiosity killed the cat. Because but the cat has 9 lives. So
that's true. There you go.
yeah.
I ask only because I think with any attribute, like we apply like this mental state good, that mental state bad. Maybe there are some mental states like gratitude that's just like always good.
Yeah.
But
well, it depends on it depends on how you frame curiosity. If curiosity is being nosy, that's one thing. But curiosity when you're trying to discover the mechanics and secrets of how things work, and there's discovery that's part of it that gives you aha moments. So really, it's not the curiosity part; it's what the curiosity leads to.
Got it.
Curiosity leads to novelty. It leads to discovery, which is another form of novelty. And then ultimately, if it gives you an aha moment, you're popping a truth bubble, what I call these truth bubbles, and these truth bubbles have flow in it, and you're adding new flow to your system persistently, forever. And so
it's
the more truths you discover, and that only happens through curiosity, then the more, what I call universal truths, the more universal truths you discover, the more aha moments you gain, the more flow you have now permanent access to. And that's a feedback loop.
I was just thinking about your experience and how you were searching for answers, right? And discovering, we haven't really talked about this, but discovering new ways of treatment for the Lymes, and how that process of kind of seeking might have also stimulated you to enter kind of the next level of flow.
Well, I definitely moved into a high state of curiosity there, because I was like, okay, if I'm going to hack this thing, I need to learn how it works. And the best way to do that is just meet a bunch of health practitioners, scientists, technologists, anyone who's done different things, and visited probably 30 to 40 alternative, what I call alternative, meaning not mainstream doctors, because their final conclusion with me was they don't know what's going on. So I ran into a dead end with that. So I tried all these other alternative fringe people on the fringe, technologists, scientists, practitioners, doctors, whatever, that are pushing the boundaries on what was accepted as mainstream. And I learned a lot. Like I learned how they view the mind and body, all the different things and angles and different systems that they look at, from Eastern medicine to, the obvious stuff would be Eastern medicine, acupuncture, Ayurveda, naturopathic, homeopathy, and all these things. But then there's some cool stuff that not even on the radar of anyone, that there are no names for this stuff. And, some of it has psychic abilities and, all sorts of stuff.
Like
that,
what?
Well, I mean, you could, like, one actually, it was interesting. This isn't psychic, but this is like a Vedic astrologer was looking at a chart of mine and was able to tell me everything that's happened to me without knowing me. First time he met me, nothing to look up either, because none of this stuff's public. It was just, and down to the date or the month and the year of when this stuff would kick in. And he was highly accurate. Like he said, in 2012, December 2011, January 2012, you're going to have a major health crisis that kicks in. It's going to affect these organs. This was 3 years later. And then I was like,
so did you go back? Did you go back to him after you realized that he was accurate?
Yeah, he was accurate. Yeah, he told me when I was going to I have a high degree of chance that I'm going to be doing a major performance in July of 2015, and it gave me like a window. And 6 months later, coincidentally, that's exactly when the performance was booked, and I had no control over that. There's only one date available, and that was the date. Wow. And I ended up doing the performance. And then later, I realized, like, oh my god, I remember him. I listened to the recording again. I was like, oh, he called that. He said that in the thing. So anyway,
I mean, these supernatural,
I can say they're supernatural. I feel like it's just another system that this group of people understand how it works, and they're just using it to, like nature, ecosystem.
I was gonna say, I mean, they're out there, right? And
there's other systems out there that are,
and it comes down to trust as well, right? In some ways, I mean.
Well, some of this stuff was like he called it in my past, so I didn't even know him. And he said, and I was like, "You're right; those organs were specifically affected." And he goes, "This sounds intense. It's like a full-on disorder." I'm like, "Yes, I had Lyme disease." He goes, "Oh, wow." Explained it. So even things that he felt like didn't make sense, actually were accurate. So I mean, that's just another example. But he had a system. It wasn't like he didn't claim to be psychic. He's like, "No, I'm just reading this and using these things as reference points to pull from." This other data, this database that he had, and but I did meet some people that had some level of psychic ability. In fact, I felt like I was developing psychic abilities when I was accessing more flow. And I think psychic abilities, everyone has them.
Well, you mentioned flow is kind of like an increased energy state, right? And when I'm a yoga practitioner, and when we talk about yoga, we speak about prana, right? And prana is kind of the energy that flows through all things. And some individuals just elevate their ability to intake more prana
Right.
and to hold that. And a lot of it is nervous system based.
Yeah.
So like how much can your nervous system handle? Like I think we all have the ability to elevate the amount of prana that we can hold within us, and then of course release because it's not ours. But it's interesting. I think like Alma as an example, Alma the hugging saint. You know, like she's beautiful, and people, thousands of people go to her and just all consistently have an experience of hugging her. Like that is what true love feels like.
Yeah.
And it elevates them, right? And I don't think anyone can really explain that. Maybe chemically it's oxytocin.
Yeah.
But
you can hug other people. Do you get the same?
Yeah,
thing,
you get the same
so,
oxytocin kick. So
yeah. So yeah, no, I agree. And you know, there's different ways of accessing. There's another system out there that I was researching for a while, called I forgot the name of it. It's super interesting. But their system has 72 levels to it, of which the 4th level was awakening your Kundalini. So that's like the beginning. And you develop all these powers or these abilities, not powers, but these abilities, telekinesis, you know, what they call it, cryokinesis, electrokinesis, like all these various abilities based on how you harness your chi, essentially. And it's based on a chi system. And Mopai, it's called Mopai. And it's super interesting. And some of the people that documented the master, how he was training them, what he's able to do was pretty remarkable. Those were not normal human abilities. You know, like stopping a bullet with your hand when your hand's at the end of a rifle and having no damage to the bullet or your hand. You know, that's interesting because where did the energy go? You know, the bullet wasn't crushed and the hand wasn't damaged. So, you know, things like that. So, I mean, I feel there's another, like in physics, we're focused on one universe, you know, or one part of the universe, and there's another part of the universe. You know, the yang is the particle universe, and the yin is how they refer to it. Yang is a particle universe, yin is a field. So energy can move between those two things too. So
almost like tapping into dark matter.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that. And so it's you know, and there's some examples of that, like where you could actually move into the yin field or the yin universe versus the yang universe. We're in the yang universe right now, but the yin universe would be,
or the Mayas, some way to refer to it.
Yeah, Maya is another reference point. The Maya would be the yang universe emerging from the yin universe, so to speak. But there's still a feedback loop, you know. So there's a feedback loop. So everything has a feedback loop. So the first thing I learned, like especially with Lyme stuff, really honed into the idea of
everything exists within a system.
Everything exists within a system, and they all have feedback loops. Because without a feedback loop, there's no autocorrect or maintenance of the system. So system if a system is in homeostasis, if it's in balance, then it has to have a feedback loop. So you got to look
change one thing, something else needs to change in order to keep the system in balance.
Right, exactly.
Got it.
So this particle universe has to have a feedback loop to keep it in balance. It can't stay in balance within itself. You know, so
this is something that I find to be so cool about, you know, going back and studying kind of the yogic texts and other, you know, ancient wisdom, is they were on point. Like if you look at the chakra system, right, and where it aligns with your glands, as well as where it aligns with kind of these kind of pockets, and you would know this better than I do, but these pockets of kind of like nerve endings, right? They are the hubs of the nervous system.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's the energetic system within our body, but also without as well. So it's, you know, I think science is still catching up to a lot of the ancient knowledge that was there before. And only now are we starting to realize, like, hey, maybe we should go back and look back at this wisdom and see what else we can learn from it.
Yeah, no, it's true. I agree. I would say science is catching up with what was already figured out.
Yeah.
You know, but what's interesting about science catching up is they could get more of the nuance and the mechanics of why it works that way, right? So
it fulfills our desire for the why. We all have that.
Yeah. Well, we're also a species that likes to create things, right? Versus just exist within things. So if we understand why, then we end up creating our own system or another version of something, or our own, you know, our own beings, our own planets.
Like
even,
how you were working on VR in the late 90s, you know?
Yeah.
And who knows when we'll end up with an oasis or a metaverse, but it's going to happen hopefully in our lifetime.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if we don't understand the mechanics of how things work, we can't, like when I got all that infusion of all these artistic ideas from Gateway to the World, I was able to dissect them and rearrange them to create new things. And that's how we work, right? So same with this. Like, okay, you arrange how the mechanics of this works. You might be able to rearrange it to solve a problem or do something, create something, another desired outcome.
We're masters of composability.
Exactly. We love to compose and rearrange and create new things. I mean, that's all creation is. It's just rearrangement of old stuff, you know? And
it's true. Like, isn't it? I mean, you're a pianist, so isn't every song kind of made up all songs? I mean, obviously they're made up of the same notes, so it's just a rearrangement of notes, but also even like chords and scales and
tempos and all sorts of stuff. There's a lot of, all sorts of variability there, but it's all not necessarily old stuff, but just rearrangement of other stuff, or other stuff or rearrangements. It's a feedback loop again, right? But I think that the whole idea of science versus ancient wisdom, they could go hand in hand as long as we don't have the skeptics disregarding the ancient stuff. Because I mean, there was certainly programmable belief systems that weren't based on science that took place, but there's a lot of stuff that actually was based on science. They had a different view on how they looked at it. It was
an individual, like especially with yogic practice, it was the science of the individual's exploration of self. So it was anecdotal within self, but if you could reproduce that experiment across thousands of masters throughout time, and they passed it on through word, then that's science, right? The N increased.
Right. So the problem with science now is you have limited tools to measure only certain things. So if you can't measure, quantify, or qualify things that are not physical in nature, or measure, it's not even physical, it's measurable, because there are physical things you can't measure yet. Like, our life force, you can't really measure with Western scientific instruments yet. But
I think it comes back to trust, and the hard thing is that so many people get burned by false prophets and by individuals that claim that they can do one thing but really can't. And I know that there's an element of like, if you don't, I think in hypnotism, I watched a professional hypnotist perform, and he was like, I cannot hypnotize you if you don't believe that I can hypnotize you. If you don't want me to, I won't be able to.
Right. Sure.
Right. So there's an element of like, we need to trust and believe for these things to have power. But there's as someone that's experienced.
Well, it's also more than that. It's not just believing. Like your physiology has to be able to accept it. Like when I had Lyme, I was like, before Lyme, I wouldn't be able to be hypnotized. During Lyme, I had such a drop in life force that I was way more susceptible to being hypnotized or programmed or influenced. So even if I believe I can be hypnotized, I could overpower that physiology probably, but my physiology has to be allowing or enabling or susceptible enough for that type of programming to take place.
Yeah. And we were talking earlier about con artists, right? And how they can take advantage of people. And I think that, I think that it's hard because I want to trust, right? And then there's a difference. Take advantage of that trust.
Yeah. So there's a difference. So trust is, so when I think of trust, I think of trust that goes with awareness. So if you have fear and trust are the two spectrums, right? So if you have a dot in the middle and an arrow point to the left, and that's fear, and an arrow point to the right, and that's trust, those are spectrums. So fear starts with doubt, and then it moves into higher states of fear. And trust doubts.
It leads to the dark side of the force.
Exactly. And trust starts with, and he nailed it, I think.
He really nailed it. Gotta love Yoda.
Yeah, gotta love Yoda. And then, trust starts with, hope, and moves in that direction, until you're in a full state of trust. But what also moves with the spectrum is ignorance on the left and awareness on the right. So, so hope goes to faith, which kind of moves up, but you have to have awareness. So if you have trust with ignorance, that's not trust. That's more like
faith.
Yeah. Well, not even faith. There is faith, there are elements of faith there, but what's really driving it is want. Right? You want this specific outcome, therefore you're going to believe,
Got it. So it's like a scientist setting up an experiment with a hypothesis up front, but really wanting that hypothesis to be true. And so now all of a sudden the experiment gets skewed, and it's actually tainted by that desire.
Because they're revel in ignorance. So they're not gaining awareness. Because if you trust with awareness, then you're getting data points, and if you're rational, then you realize, okay, this is making less sense, or this is becoming, or the risk factors don't balance out with, the patterns of what could happen or would happen or should happen. then you could be more precautious. I mean, you could be more, if you're more aware, then you'll be able to make better decisions. But if you're reveling in ignorance and you allow yourself to do that, then your decisions are going to be less likely to be, the right ones. So, so there's trust with awareness is kind of what I always, when I think of trust, or when I say trust, I mean trust with awareness. And awareness is just more understanding, more data, more information.
It's almost like trust but verify.
Yeah, trust but verify. Sometimes you can't verify everything.
Yeah,
so
and I think that's why. Well, and that's where I think this argument of kind of like spirituality versus science comes into play. Even though they can be very much aligned, I think of Graham Hancock as like a prime example of someone that struggles with this in his life, right? Like you can't prove it, therefore it must not be true,
right? Which is a bad. It's
not the best framework, but it's what some people have to work with. And then on the flip side, it's like you can't disprove it,
right.
So therefore it has to be true,
right?
And there's somewhere in the middle as well.
Yeah, that's a black and white version, right? So if I mean, there's a version where you can't prove it, therefore it could be true or it may not be true, but you're open to the idea that it could be true, but you're not going to be surprised if it isn't true. So that way you allow more information to flow to you to help figure out what side of the scale it sits on. But the minute you cut off that flow, the minute you say, no, that's not true, but just because you can't prove it with your limited information and your limited framework and your limited tools, then you may cut off a huge opportunity of, even if it's not true, but you may discover a whole bunch of new stuff on the way, right? So you just limit yourself from opportunity and more knowledge and information awareness.
On that side of the spectrum, like I always like to use the analogy of kind of the underwater creatures, another planet Earth analogy, where there are certain creatures that live in the deep sea that radiate a color, let's say red, that most of the other deep sea creatures can't perceive. And so they're literally floating around invisible to every other creature around them. And I think about water as a fluid and air as a fluid. And so when we think about ghosts or we think about spirits or whatnot, just because we cannot perceive them with our senses does not mean that they're not there. And that's like a very clear case to me of like, if there are things that exist in this one fluid that most species can't perceive, and we're just in a different kind of fluid, then it's obvious to me that there can be, spirits or whatever you want to call it that we don't perceive, or energy that we don't have the ability to perceive. Now, that doesn't mean that it is there. And so when I make that argument, sometimes my friends that are more on like the logical, rational side of the spectrum, that feels actually like a rational argument to me. But some people come back at me and say like, well, then you can say anything that we can't disprove is true.
Is possible.
Is possible.
Not true, but possible. Yeah. And I would agree with that. I think any of this stuff that you can't disprove is possible for sure. Doesn't mean it's probable or it is, but it's possible. So there's no detriment to pulling out a possibility or to recognizing a possibility. If you have to make a choice on a possibility, then you want more information and data. But if you don't, then leave it open. Allow for possibilities to exist, because technically anything is possible. It just depends on the circumstances and the context. Like I know people that have taken plant medicine and they have viscerally and in groups experience seeing things together, and or experience other realms. And they've all consistently experienced the same realms or seen the same lady ayahuasca, communicating with them or whatever. And so there's so much out there that we literally have a very limited tool set to measure what we think we see and know and perceive. So,
and now I think science on the plant medicine side, science is starting to catch up with that in some ways. And we're seeing more experiments with groups that are held in that heightened state under DMT, for example, for a long period of time, where they're trying to add some kind of scientific rigor to studying the visions that these people see. And so that's interesting, right? We have this desire on the science side to prove, to prove something to be. It's almost like, it's a cool, not contradiction.
Well, science is your mass baseline, right? So this is really the baseline for the masses. Like people experience things, and those experiences are true. Now, why that's true, that's a different story. But it's true to them, right? So then the question is, if it's reproducible through multiple people, then it could be true for many. Then science is really something that's meant to be true for the masses,
repeatable. Yeah, and you've had
truth for the masses, but
and you've
repeatable
had
by
direct experience with this as well, because you went and took a different path towards curing yourself in a way of Lyme disease, and you didn't use traditional scientific means. Your science, you took a scientific approach.
They have very limited traditional scientific. They have one test called a Western blot, which is really bad and very inaccurate, and only limited to Northeast ticks. So it's not a good, so it's not a good tool. So they don't have a lot of great science about it.
I want to go back to flow state, because I know we're running short on time, which is great because we've been all over.
Yeah.
So going back to flow state, so physiological, mental states.
Oh yeah. So let me tell you the 5 things. So physiological, mindset. 2, 3 is environment. The environment could be toxins in the air, in the water, or whatever else. It could also be space design. Like you could be in a cubicle, and that could reduce flow versus being in open, like outdoors, or being in an office with windows, or a house with windows.
I love my office for outdoors.
Yeah. So environment is a big influence. Sunlight versus cloudy cities. All those things. The 4th is social interaction. So interacting with other people, other animals, other life, outdoors, nature, plants, things, whatever that might be. And I found like when I was really bad, I was isolating myself, because I was thinking that's the right thing to do. And I didn't want to be embarrassed and feel bad around people. But when I go to these birthday parties and things I'd committed to going, I actually felt better. I felt normal. So I was like, oh man, I need to be more socially active to normalize my, to feel good than isolated. So it's counterintuitive to me at the time, but I realized, wow, social interaction actually is nourishing because we feed off each other's flow. Like last night when we did this piano sound bath, it's very different when you have 100 people in a room doing it together than when it's just a couple people, because there's a compounding effect, exponential effect of every person that's in the room exponentializes the ability for everyone to drop in deeper together. And just like a yoga class. When
we do the collective breath in yoga class and you sigh out the air together, it's like
so much more powerful. Yeah, it's a compound effect, beautiful. Right? Yeah. And same, like I bend more, like I used to teach yoga, and I bend more when I'm in a yoga class with multiple people than when I'm doing it on my own, just because I'm feeding off everyone else's energy and vice versa. So we all end up going deeper or being able to do more.
I didn't study much under him, but Dharma Mitra in New York is a guru from Brazil that many follow, and he's incredible. And I studied psychic development with him and some pranayama practices. I'd like to learn more, but his classes often they have a session where there's 2 mats in the middle and there's a group circle around where everybody's doing the poses, and then at random he'll call people in, or if they feel so inclined to come in and do as an offering to the group, a pose. And just to see the difference, right? The power that brings as you're kind of in the center of the circle doing your offering to the group, like how much deeper you can go, because of that energy.
When everyone's feeding you flow. Yeah. So I've done his thing, and I've done that too in our classes where we'll have 4 mats laying around and people we're in a circle and people just run in the middle and do their pose. And when I did it, I did things that I haven't been able to do, especially then. Yeah. I'd float into crow and then move into headstand and then roll out of it into a warrior position. Like, it was just like stuff like, holy, like I didn't even know to do that stuff. And I was doing it just because I was feeding off all the flow and love and, and positive confirmation from everybody.
We talk about festivals too. It's just like that, right? It's, you can get in a crowd at a festival and all of a sudden it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
Or the opposite.
No. So 4th is social interaction. And the 5th is lifestyle. Like, so, creative endeavors I found are super flow inducing. This is where Ayurveda was super helpful for me. I found like the right lifestyle habits that was nourishing to my constitution, to my dosha.
And what is Ayurveda?
So Ayurveda is the Indian health science of yoga. So sister science of yoga. Yoga is, Ayurveda is where you actually look at the full system. Yoga is a path within Ayurveda, so to speak. So you could actually use certain yoga poses to actually heal certain ailments. So it's the health side. It's like Eastern medicine equivalent of like, for India.
Understood.
So Ayurveda, you're based on these, what they call 3 doshas, basic doshas, which is your constitutions, your mind and body, what the makeup is. And, Kapha, Pitta, Vata. And these things are incredibly wildly accurate, I found, with Lyme, because when my Vata was out of balance, I'd eat the foods that were suggested to help pacify a Vata and balance. I would do the yoga poses. I would do, like the lifestyle time, the lifestyle habits that were suggested, the times to eat, how often to eat, like all these lifestyle day-to-day things was really accurate. Even the oils to use, super accurate to what was calming me down. Like you can have a real organic food, but certain foods will still not be good for you, and other foods will be, if they're all healthily grown foods, So depending on what dosha or what constitution you are. So broccoli might be good for you, but not good for me. Where mushrooms might be great for me,
and what are the 3 doshas? Like, what do they represent? Because I'm thinking of the 3 gunas for some reason.
Yeah, gunas are different. So the 3 doshas they're based on, in the Indian culture, it's based on 5 elements, right? Earth, water, fire, wind, or air, and space, the void, and or ether is what they call it. So, Kapha is earth and water. So those are the people that are really big bone, really round faces, smiley, big teeth, big eyes, really grounded. They love rhythm. They love to they're very loyal. They're very they like rhythms, but they don't like, once they're put on a rhythm, they want to keep going, in that direction. But they're slow and steady, but they're very steady and reliable, right? Pittas are fire and water. They're like the trailblazers, the entrepreneurs, the salespeople. They like to burn paths in, and they're very like fiery and like driven and ambitious.
Aspirational or actually ambitious?
Sometimes both. It depends. Some are aspirational, some are ambitious, but they're very driven, whatever that is, right? But they're also like flowy because they get around roadblocks. They don't stop. So, okay, if there's something that, they'll flow around it. So that's where the water comes from. The fire is, the drive, the rocket fuel. And then Vatas are air and ether, and they're the artists, the visionaries. So they're the ones that are floating up here, and they have a higher vantage point. They can see more. And when they create beauty, they create,
And can one's constitution be kind of on the border of?
Yeah, so I'm a Pitta Vata.
Ah, okay. So
yeah. So you get more than one. There's dominant ones, but and you actually have all 3. It's just one's more dominant than the others, or you may have a combo that's dominant than the third. So when my Pitta went out of balance, it threw my Vata through the roof when I had Lyme. So I had to do things to bring. Cause I was feeling untethered. I was like floating up here, going with the wind. So when Vatas are in balance, they become indecisive. They don't follow through on things. They're hot and cold. They're like up and down emotionally. They're untethered. They're just because they're not grounded. When a Pitta is out of balance, they get burnt out. They become irritable. They become like really fiery and impatient. They become dehydrated. The fire burns all their fluids. And Kapha
sounds familiar right now.
And Kapha, when they're in balance, they become really stubborn. They don't want to change. They want to move. They start to hoard things. They become very paranoid. Like everyone's trying to take stuff from them. So mentally they become, paranoid and like protective, overly protective.
And you can have those three elements, right?
We have all 3. It's just our nature has one of them is more dominant than the others, in our natural state. But then we can move into the other state. So I could pull Kapha out of me and ground and do all those things. I could pull Pitta. But my long-term natural state is Pitta, probably.
What practices do you have to pull for yourself? To pull these different mind states, or even to pull yourself into flow state. What practice do you have?
It changes. So like a lot of what I'm doing. What I've been doing has been kind of more focused on creation lately, but traditionally, like meditation, yoga is all this good stuff to like keep your body systems functioning or optimized, and or exercise of some kind. But I haven't done that as often as I used to lately. But a lot of it for me has been diet. The right foods and eating the right way has been super helpful and nourishing. Certain supplements I take based on what I feel. What nutrients I feel like I need. And perceptually, like I have this really interesting loose perception with time. So I don't have a very hard connection with time as far as my age is concerned. So I tend to age better or slower than most people. Some people say it's genetic, but I look at other people in my family, it's not.
How old are you?
44.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I see that. That's crazy. I was not.
How old would you think I was?
Your 30s.
Yeah, that's when most people 32, 33. So,
Yeah. Wow.
so I think it has a lot to do with my perception of time and not connecting to time too rigidly. So, and what I mean
It's
by
funny
that,
how the yoga masters think about our lives in the number of heartbeats that we have or breaths, because the slower our breath, the slower our heart rate.
yeah,
We all are born with a certain number of heartbeats.
Mhm.
And so maybe your perception of time, lack of perception of time slows your heart rate and thus allows you to age slower. But many of them have, they appear to be, much younger than they really are.
Well, you have a limited amount of heartbeats based on the perceptual level you're at, is what I would say. I'd add one more factor. If you reach higher states of perception, then you have more. So within a, and everything, I think source of all flow is and the source of all fear is perception. So if you could start opening up your perceptual lenses, you access more flow, and now you're leveling up your baseline. But within the baseline, you have a certain amount of heartbeats. If you level it up, you actually have more heartbeats. So you could
How do
actually
you open up perceptual lenses?
Well, that's my
I'm sure.
well, no, that's my system. I kind of framework I've been developing. I call it flowology, but until I think of a better name for it. But I did call it quantum body, but it felt too quantum-y. So so it felt too ethereal versus like real. So flowology. So you have 5 layers to how we access flow. So the 5 things I told you about were lifestyle points of flow, like sources of flow. So it's on this this life plane, so to speak. Physiology, means your body, your mind, essentially, your environment, social interactions, and lifestyle. Those 5 things. Those are the points of entry for flow or points of blockage. But how flow comes into our system through a human experience is the vertical version of that versus the horizontal version. You have a physical body. That's the final layer to where we access flow, and the symptomatic layer. Then the layer above that's your meridian body, so where your chakras and your meridians are, or your nadis in yoga. That's what we refer to them. Your energy channels, essentially, right? That's what powers your body, essentially.
I think their Dharma said 72,000 nadis.
Yeah, 72,000 nadis, right? It's the number that the yogic texts have.
It's incredible.
Yeah. So
the precision.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Precision. And the level and the number of rerouting potential. Right. Our bodies can reroute flow so efficiently. Which is why we sustain ourselves.
I think of Nadi Shodanam. How you can rebalance your left and right just by changing the nostrils that you breathe through.
Exactly. And then the 3rd layer is our mental emotional body. Which is where fear and trust. That's where that became a big component of. The 4th layer is what I call our perceptual body. That's where our belief systems and programming exist. And the 5th layer is this universal realm, or this realm of universal truths. And that's where infinite flow exists. That's the life force. That's the ocean of flow.
They're Brahman potentially, would you say?
Yeah, I'd say, that's where all flow and exists, right? All life force exists, all the potential energy in space, so to speak. And if we have a belief system misaligned with the truth, then we get less flow. That generates fear-based emotions, which creates less flow. Then that creates meridian blocks, which creates less flow. Then your body gets drops of flow from this ocean of flow available to it. And then the drops of flow you have the physical toxins, the heavy metals, the chemicals, the pathogens, the food allergens that come in and block your flow even more. If you don't deal with that, you develop disease, eventually atrophy, and die. So in my case, I had to reclaim the flow I already had within the perceptual lens that was already existing. So whatever drops I was getting, I had to reclaim that. So that's what I mean. Like, you have a certain amount of heartbeats within that. If nothing else changes up here, so to speak. So, but if you start opening up channels to more flow,
then you can expand.
Then things change down here too. So the perceptual lens is this bridge between universal truths and the perceptual body, which is all the belief system and programming. So I found that, like, the way I modeled it is these truths, say there's 6,000 some truths that we're here to experience in the human experience. They're capturing these, what I call these truth bubbles. And each of these truth bubbles have flow in it. And when you hit an aha moment, you pop a truth bubble, and that flow goes to your baseline and increases your baseline by that much. And the more truth bubbles, the more aha moments you get, these universal truths you experience, not discover or know about intellectually, but you have to experience them. That's what raises your baseline. And that's how your baseline of flow increases. And when that happens, your immune system goes up, your functions, your abilities go up. And that's kind of how I was systematically popping these truth bubbles. I found a way of figuring out what my triggers were, and that reversed engineering me to what aha moment I had to discover. And that's how I was boosting my baseline flow pretty much. And that until a point where I did enough where my immune system got so much stronger.
So there's so much here. I think that I have one more question for you, and for people listening, because I think this is really important. Is how would you recommend for the individual kind of sitting in that cubicle, working that 9-to-5 job, to make a living, kind of living that life, to access their flow? Does that make sense? You know what I mean? Like how can we, like you've been through this, you've had incredible experiences, you've been around the world interacting with teachers that helped you access all these different tools, you've been building frameworks, you interacted with hundreds of artists. Like your individual experience is I think unique, and all of our experiences are unique. However, how can others tap into what you're
I would say
describing here?
Well, the same way I started my journey, which was just learning how fear works. Having the inquiry mind of learning how fear works was foundational to everything else. And that's what led me to everything else. So like learning about how to exercise your ability to trust with awareness.
Do you trust everyone that you come into contact with as just a baseline?
Yeah, I don't, it's not even whether I trust anyone or not trust it. I actually just trust, I don't know if you want to call it the universe, source, whatever. And I trust that whatever is going to happen to me, I'm covered and protected in my best interest to protect and serve my intentions. So then it takes the pressure off trusting people, to a higher state, because people are limited in their perception. So why would I limit my trust to a limited perceived, or a being with limited perception, right? So I would kind of move up the scale and say, okay, I'm going to trust this system, and it's a higher vantage point up here than these systems down here. And so I give people the benefit of the doubt, and I move through, and you could change people. Like if you trust somebody, you could shift their energy completely and they become trustworthy when traditionally they may not be. So also that I'm aware, I run multiple businesses, and businesses are all about managing people. So I understand, when I look at someone, I try to see where they're coming from. And, one of the tools is where in the Maslow's hierarchy are they? Okay, are they in survival, or are they in safety, or are they in,
It's so funny that you bring up Maslow's hierarchy, because earlier you said something that reminded me of Chip Conley, and Chip wrote Peak Performance, and it's basically he redefined Maslow on management. That's
that's essentially, you feel what serves their immediate need, then you focus on that conversation, or focus that, or just even understanding that. You can then, it all goes back to just understanding. If you have enough curiosity to understand the other person, like in cultures are all the problems and the wars come up because of this. In most cases, not all cases, but because there's not enough depth of understanding the other person's culture, or what their real needs are. Because most times you'll find out that there's probably an easy compromise that serves both people, and if you don't inquire enough to learn what that is, then you'll never get there. And then the conflict arises because people get stuck in their differences, and so
to access flow, if we don't have a creative pursuit.
So here's how I did it. I would put myself in places of what I consider danger, or things that put me in fear states. Figure out what I was feeling and thinking during those times. And then when I was not in a fear state, fill out what I was thinking and feeling those times. Figure out what the difference was between the two. And then try to do enough of those to understand why. And once I did enough of those, I mean, I swam with sharks, I jumped out of planes, I rock climbed, I solo, bungee jump, I did all sorts of things on the physical layer.
Oh, we could talk for like 5 hours.
Yeah, just to figure out what I was thinking before and why, what I was afraid of. And then, and then I found these patterns. There's just patterns. And when I realized, oh, all these things I'm thinking of, what if, it's like one of those patterns, like, and then it started moving into different things, relationships, which are more, not outward physical death, thing. It's more about, vulnerability issues, right? Rejection
and that kind of holding as well sometimes, right? The attachment of a relationship,
right,
where everything else can seem to change, but if a relationship changes, then it's a failure.
Right. So, relationships are usually about rejection, worth, respect, these other intrinsic, internal emotional edges, versus external edges. So that was a whole nother, and by the way, those are way more complicated to figure out than the external ones. The external ones are easy. So the internal ones, because they're very well, we have an emotional immune system and we hide these things. We put them down so we can function. So we got to allow them to bubble up or be able to inquire enough to figure out where they're coming from. That's what the triggers are. And triggers come from previous programming from when you were a kid, or, incidences and trauma that may have happened through life. So unwinding all that stuff, that's where the real practice of fear and fear shedding and, comes from. So, but anyway, anyone that wants to like learn about flow, I think the first thing you need to do is understand fear. Because once again, perception is the source of all flow and also the source of all fear.
And so if we're afraid, we close ourselves off to flow.
Exactly. And if you trust, or if you're open, you open yourself up to flow.
Beautiful. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
I appreciate this so much. Thank you.
No, you're so welcome.
Oh, that's great.